My name is Dorothy Clark, and I am a Cheyenne River Sioux Indian. I'm enrolled at this reservation, and my parents were Emma and Willard Walters. I was born at Cheyenne Agency on March 7th, 1924 at 6:30 p.m. And I lived with my parents up until I was about 3 years old, and we moved to the Black Hills of South Dakota. We moved out to where my grandmother had a ranch. Her name was Adele Walters. Her maiden name was Courtier. And my other family members, my ancestors, were on my mother's side. My mother's maiden name was Arpan, and her father and mother's names were Sarah and Albert Arpan. And they lived at south of Whitehorse, South Dakota, at where they built their ranch at a place called Twin Buttes. It's just about, I'd say, 5 miles out of Timberlake, or south of Timberlake, South Dakota. And my grandmother's maiden name was Balker, and her father's name was Matthew Balker. I don't remember her mother's name. Was it Iron Door?
No, that was Grandma's legacy.
But he was an Englishman, but his wife was a full-blooded Sioux Indian. And then my father's family, my grandma that had the ranch up by Bear Butte, her father's name was John Courtier, and his wife's name was Arendor?
As far as I know, that's her name.
His wife's name was Irondor, and they were first enrolled onto the Yankton Agency. And when they said that, when they were going to do away with the Yankton Agency, which they've always been trying to do, my grandmother, Adele Courtier, she came to Cheyenne River in 1905, and she relinquished her enrollment down on Yankton, and she got enrolled up here on Cheyenne River, and that's how they got up here, how she got up here. And then I think the oldest one in about the 5th generation or 6th generation, my grandfather his name was Grayface, and that's all I have in that area. But in my on my mother's side, on the Arpan side, on the 4th generation, one of my grandmother's name was Curly Woman. I don't have my family tree with me, but then I can this is what I remember off of it. And there were 3 Curly women, and we are related to the Curleys here on Cheyenne River. And that's as far back as I can go with my family tree without looking at the family tree. I was 6 years old. I was 3 years old when we moved up to the Black Hills and lived with my grandmother and my mother and dad. My mother and dad, I always lived with my mother and dad. I never had anyone else to live with. I stayed with my family. And when I was 6 years old, and we moved into Sturgis, and I remember I went to school there. I think I was in the first grade. And I went to public school at Sturgis, and we were the only Indian family that lived at Sturgis at that time. And that was in the early 1930s or 1929, something like that. And well, I was born in 1924 and I was 6, so it would be 1930. And I went to school at Sturgis, and we were the only Indian family there, as I said. And it was just really difficult because there was a public school and a Catholic school, and I went to the public school. And I was just the only Indian, and really got a lot of flack from the other kids about being an Indian. I don't even think they really knew what an Indian was, but I was an Indian. And the rest of the children were white children. And that's, about all I can say right now. Ione, maybe you could tell them about your beginning.
Well, I can't remember when I went to my grandmother. I don't know how little I was, but I always lived with her until we moved back out here. When I was 13 years old, we moved here. And I came to stay with my folks. But I lived with my grandmother northeast of Bear Butte. And when we were out in the country, we used to go to school with my cousin, to a country school. Louis would come and stay with us, my brother. He'd come and stay with us, and then we'd go to the school with my cousin. And I think it was just because we weren't in school. It was kind of send us there to get us out of the way, I guess. I don't know. But we used to go every day anyway. And then when Louis was he left, and then he'd leave and go somewhere, and I didn't know where he went, but he'd go someplace. And he'd come back, and when Louis was going to be in the first grade, she built a little house in town, and she said Louis was coming to live with us, and he's going to go to school at Sturgis. So she built this little house, and we moved from the country to this little house. And then the first year Louis went to school, I used to walk to school with him all the time, and like Dorothy said, it was really a hassle. We used to get beat up every day. Get beat up or else get run home or something. And he started in the first grade, but he got sick, so he only went 6 months, and he had to not go to school anymore. He was sick from it, and he missed too much school. So they said he had to take the first grade over. So the second year we were there, I started school with him in the first grade again. I was in the first grade. And then the year after that, when I was in the second grade, we went to school at Rapid City Indian School. He sent us down there. In Rapid City Indian School, it was nice, except it was really strict. You couldn't speak a word of Lakota or anything. And I never did learn how to talk Lakota, and I don't think I ever will. I've taken a lot of classes, and I just don't get it. You were punished all the time, things like that. And so if you did talk Lakota, it was really hard on you to be there at school for the ones who did. And but then I went to school there then from the second grade to the seventh grade. And in seventh grade I went half a year, and then the school closed. So then I went back to Sturgis and I went half a year there, seventh grade, and then I took 8th grade at Sturgis, and then when I was in high school we came out here to Cheyenne River boarding school. And for me it was really hard because everybody out here talked Lakota. And I'd always ask my grandmother when I was with her if she'd teach me to talk her language, and she'd say, no, it's a detriment to you. And I always thought a detriment was something that would just come along and eat me up. So after I grew up and started taking classes and stuff, I've taken a lot of classes, and this Dana Dupree was the last class I started taking, and we had that bad winter, and so I stopped. But I do think I would have learned something from Dana Dupree. And that's the only class that I ever took that I thought I would gain anything from. But I did learn how to sing Indian and pray in Indian behind I still don't know what I'm saying in it, but I can still do it because I memorized it. And we had to go to church, so that's why our mother wanted us to learn how to sing Indian and stuff, so that's what we did. So I can do that, but as far as other Indian things are concerned, like cooking and stuff, I think I know a lot of things that a lot of elderly people here don't even know. And that's just from living with my grandmother and watching her feed people and stuff, and you do them. And besides, I don't know, it's just, I never knew any other grandparent except her, because the rest of them were dead. And the only way I found out about my family tree was when they were going to do this. I was working in the office and I had to do a family tree for this year. What's that guy's name?
Mississippi Judgment.
That Mississippi Judgment claim. And my mother's sister got some papers, and her brother to help fill those out, and then they told us we could apply for it. So then we, through our mother, so then that was when I figured out what our family tree was, and she had to have it. So then when I sent mine to Montana at that court, I lost it. Mine, I don't have it. So I guess that's about up to where Dorothy was in her story.
Okay, I needed to say a little bit about my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather's name was Peter Arpan, and my great-grandmother's name was Elizabeth Starr, One Star. They had shortened their name to Starr. And she was from she came and lived at Sisseton as they were pushing the Indians west. Then that was where she was. And she married my grandfather. My grandfather came down he was a French Canadian, and he came down and they got married in Union County in October 5th, 1896. And I have a copy of their marriage license. And they're sure different than ours were. And they were married, I mean, like, it says just the county, Union County. And it doesn't give a town or anything, but I do remember the person that married them, and I think his name was Van Meter, his last name. And so I'm related to people in Sisseton. They do have the stars over there yet, and I did meet some of them one time when I went over there for a workshop. And and I need to tell you about my own family. There was my dad and my mom, and there was my brothers, Louis Walters, Robert Leroy Walters, Joe Walters, and Raymond Walters were my brothers. And then my sisters was Ione, and Ione Lee, and Velma Lee. My sister Velma married a Lee, and then myself, and that was our family. But we did have an older brother that died when he was a baby. So really there were, instead of 7 of us, there were 8 born to my mom. So then I went to school after I went to school in Sturgis, I went to school in Rapid City, and I was in the 2nd grade. And the Susan was a boarding school, an Indian boarding school. And we went to school, I went to school there for 4 years. And it was like a military academy. We used to have to wear uniforms. And I can remember that, of course, we had to go to church on Sundays, and it took us all a good hour or more to get ready for church. We went to church, and then after church, well, then we had to march until noon, and then we got to eat dinner. I always remember that because I sure didn't like those to march and be in those companies. And we had to make sure everything was, our shoes were shined and we looked sharp. So I went to school there. It was just a regular boarding school, and about one of the biggest things that happened was I had my tonsils out when I was there. And they had a little teeny dispensary. And I remember that's where I had my tonsils out. The only good thing about that was I got to eat all the ice cream I wanted. And then I went to school there the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th grades. And then they closed the boarding school, the school part, but we still stayed up there, and they took 60 students, and they were from all over Oklahoma, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. The kids were from all over, but they only took 60 children. That's all that they would let board there. And we went to school downtown in Rapid City. I went to Jefferson School, I remember, but we were from an Indian boarding school, they put us all back 1 year. And so then that year I had to make the 4th and the 5th grades in that year. And I did. And then in my then they closed the school completely because they were going to make a TB sanitarium out of that facility, which they did. But the biggest thing that I remember there in the last year, it had to have been in 1934, maybe, or 33. It's right along in there was when they were going to do that, their Indian Reorganization Act, and they had a great big meeting at that school, at the Indian boarding school. And all of us kids that stayed there then, we got to work. And then we had the Indian Commissioner, John Collier, there, and he was really a nice man. And then we must have had close to, I'd say, 1,000 Indians there, or 1,000 people, and most of them Indians that came to that conference. And they had a conference there for a whole week. And we had to make beds, sell papers, we had to do everything that they told us to do. And then when we got through with that, why, after they were through with the conference, why, later, kind of towards spring, why, then they sent us all a check in our name. And I got $100 and some, and it was close to, I'd say, Easter. And I remember I bought Easter clothes. I bought clothes, mostly clothes with mine. And that was a lot of money then, but we worked hard that week for that money. It seemed like we never rested. And then they closed that school down completely. And I went back to Sturgis with my folks, and I went to school there while I was in the 6th grade. By that time, I'd learned how to be aggressive and take care of myself and everything, so it wasn't too bad because I could kind of hold my own with anybody that wanted to bad time me because I was a dirty Indian. let's see. Then in the fall, we moved to Cheyenne Agency. I mean, we come to school at Cheyenne Agency. I remember my folks came out to Cheyenne Agency, and of course we didn't know what Cheyenne Agency was or where it was, but they came out 2 weeks before we moved out here, and they enrolled us in the boarding school. And so, well, they had to, because that was, you know, where we were going to go to school, and they had to get a place to live and everything. So I remember when I came out, it was in 1935, the fall, in September.
The paper's making too much noise on the microphone. The microphone's oversensitive, so maybe you just put it down on the ground for a minute or something. Yeah, that's good.
And it was in 1935, and I think I was 11 years old. And I was in the 7th grade then. And come to Cheyenne Agency to school, and this is where I met when we got. It took us all day. It took us 2 days to get to LaPont. With my dad had a good truck, and he had all of our belongings in that truck and all of his kids. And we came and we stayed at Dupree that first night with Aunt Philomene. And then the next day we came to LaPont. And Dad had that truck loaded down, and so he didn't want to drive us to the agency in that truck. And so then he went to see Paul Hyber, because he knew Paul Hyber before. And Paul Hyber was Martin's father. And so he took us, he worked for the government, and he had a government truck. So then they loaded us kids in our suitcases and stuff in it, and we went to the agency, and it was at night. And you couldn't see what the country was like or anything. And so Paul took us down there, and then that was when I first met him. And he was a nice man. We lived neighbors to him, just across the fence for a number of years. But anyhow, at Cheyenne Agency, when I woke up the next morning, there was no pine trees. And it was just bare looking, except down by the river, the Missouri River, and it was just a small river then. It's nothing like it is now, you know, like the Oahe Dam. It was real. It wasn't very far across. In fact, you could swim across the Missouri River. And it was real dirty. And there were trees along the river. But up where they had the school, there was no pine trees, and that, evergreen trees, and that was what I was used to. I got up and I looked out and I jumped back in bed, and that was it. I swore I was never going to get out of that bed. I remember Ione came in there and she said, "Get up, you gotta go to breakfast." She said, "We have to go to school today." And I said, "I'm not doing anything." I said, "I'm not gonna go or nothing." I laid in that bed and I stayed there, and everybody was coming in there trying to bribe me and everything else, but I wouldn't even talk. I just covered up my head, and that was it. And I found out that then there was another matron that was coming in to see me, and here it was a matron that was the dining room matron in Rapid City. So I knew her. So she came in there, and I was just really glad to see her. And her husband, I knew her husband too. And so then she's talking to me and telling me to get up and everything, and she said, "We live here in this building in the girls' dormitory." And she said, "So get up," she said, and "you can bathe in my room, in our apartment," she said, "and Doug's in there, he'll help you with your hair," because he would always fix hair, and so, of course I knew them, so then I went right with her and got cleaned up and everything, and then I went to school at noon. But I sure didn't like Cheyenne Agency. I had a couple of cousins there, but I hadn't ever been around them or anything, and I really didn't know them. And but you get used to boarding schools, you know, and you know what to look for, like boys coming into the dining room and which one's going to be your boyfriend, and you know how girls are. Well, I was one of those silly girls too then. And I went to Cheyenne Agency, to the Cheyenne Agency school until I graduated in 1941. Remember, my dad said that I could leave home when I graduated. And here, when I graduated, I was 16 all my senior year, and I was the only one that went to school there. And until March, and then in March I turned 17 and I graduated in May. And I wasn't old enough to get my Sioux benefit, and I couldn't go on to school. I put in for a loan, but it didn't come through right away, so I wanted to go to school in Haskell, but I couldn't go there. But what I remember mostly about my days at the Cheyenne Agency, in a way it was fun for me because I had really a lot of friends. And when we first got there, they took all our clothes away from us, and we just packed them in a suitcase, and they locked them up in the suitcase room. And you couldn't wear those, and they gave you clothes to wear, and they gave you government clothes to wear, and they were always too big, way too big for you. And I never was very tall, so I was always going around with some long dress and baggy sweater and government stogies that clumped up and down on my feet, and peanut butter hose, we called them. They're socks that were stockings that were peanut butter, and bloomers and long johns. And we were supposed to wear those. So we bathed on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights. And we got these bundles. They'd issue us these bundles, and those are the things that were in that bundle. So when we would go by the dirty clothes chute, we'd jerk those long johns out of there and throw them down the dirty clothes chute. So those long johns were really clean because they never got worn and they were washed all year. We wouldn't wear them. I always remember that. And if you done something wrong, like trying to talk Indian, some words I knew because my mother knew how to talk Indian, and my grandma knew how to talk Indian too, but we never did learn how because grandma spoke the D dialect and of course mom was L. And it was always kind of pretty confusing to me. And so when we did something wrong, why then we had to scrub the playroom, I remember, or kneel on the steps or some stupid thing. And I don't know, I think I scrubbed that in the years that I was there, from the 7th grade through the, we were in that building for about 3 or 4 years, and then they built new ones. But when we were in that building, I swear I scrubbed that floor, that playroom floor, 100 times, and it was big. It was a big floor, and I always remember that because I was always getting into trouble for some reason or another that I didn't know why I would get into trouble, but then I guess it was mostly because I was aggressive and I didn't let anybody get away with anything where I was concerned. And I learned that in boarding school and also in Sturgis. You had to stick up for yourself because there wasn't anybody else to do it for you.
Yeah, that's the one thing I always admired Dorothy for. She could always just tell somebody to go straight to, you know, and I never could.
And then my stories aren't very long. The things that I learned about culture, I learned from my mother. And My mother, even though she lived among non-Indians and everything, well, then she kept a lot of her cultural ways, like the way, the way we ate, the things she taught us about our bodies, all the kinds of things that, a mother teaches a child that's a Indian child. And I learned that kind of stuff from my mother. She was a good woman. And like Ione said, well, then she used to make us go to church. We got to go home in the summertime, and we did a lot of dancing and a lot of working because we didn't have water and electricity and all that good stuff that they have nowadays. And we had to work, so there wasn't too much time to get into mischief because we were forever working. But when we played hard. When we went to like memorials and those kind of things, we really got into it. And most of our social life was done at the church. We'd go over there and we'd have basket socials. We would have just play games there and have prizes and stuff on a Saturday night. And then after I got bigger, well, then we got to go to dances and stuff like that. But we had to make sure that we were home, got home and everything, and we're there for church. And I can remember my mother calling us, waking us up to get ready for church, and she'd always say, "Come on, get up, come on. It's time to go to church. If you can dance all night Saturday, you can pray all day Sunday." I just always remember that. It seemed like every Sunday she said the same thing. And we went to church, and all the services at LaPlante were in Indian. And of course they were Indian, and then the English version on the other side of the page. And but I never did learn how to talk Indian, but I did learn how to read Indian and write Indian by going to church. And we went to church every single Sunday. I went to church every Sunday all my life until I got married. And I got married the same year that I graduated from school. I married Dale Clark. He was from Timberlake, and his family lived about 2 miles. Before they moved into town, they lived about 2 miles from my grandparents. So he knew my grandparents, and I never did know them because they died by the time I was big enough to be back on the reservation. And he used to tell me things about my grandparents. He used to tell me about how when he needed tobacco or anything, well, then he'd go and he'd get trap skunks for my grandmother and kill them, take them over there, and she'd make, use the skunk oil, that we used for coals and stuff. She used that and stuff, and then she'd always give him tobacco for his whatever he brought over there. So he said he always had smoking tobacco, and he stayed with them a lot of times because he liked my uncle Swap Arpan, Albert Arpan. I had an uncle that was named Albert too. And so he told me a lot of things about Grandma and Grandpa. And that was in 1941 that we got married. Do you want to talk up some more?
No, I don't.
Go ahead. Tell some of the things that you told me, like yesterday when I was talking to you on the phone.
When I lived in the hills?
Yeah. With Grandma.
Can I start there?
Sure.
Anywhere.
I grew up with my grandmother northeast of Bear Butte in when he moved to town, I lived with her. The only time I was away from her was when I went to boarding school at Rapid. And she taught me a lot of things. For one thing, she taught me how to work. That's all she did was work. And I had a tree house that she had made for me, and that's mostly where I played by myself. And Les Lewis would come in, and they never wanted to play in the tree house. They just wanted to run. But she had other grandchildren that were grown up, and they used to come out there, and she had 6 quarters of land out there, and she used to plant part of it, or they'd come and plant part of it for her. She didn't read or write, but she used to really draw, and she'd say this was going to be planted into this. And then it seemed like the big excitement in my life was when it was time to plant or time to harvest. Because these boys would come and they'd plant for her grandsons, 2 of them, and then they'd leave, and then in the fall when it was time to harvest, there'd be a whole bunch of people come. She had a thrashing machine. Everybody in our part of the country seemed like used that machine, took it to their place and used it too. But all these people would come and they would harvest, and then they'd haul everything away and do whatever with it. And then after we moved into town, moved away from that ranch, I never could figure out why we never ever went back to this place. I always wanted to go back, and when we moved into town, she didn't take all her stuff with her, and she was going to get them. So she had a little room built onto this 2 rooms she had, and so while they were doing that, well, she'd say, as soon as this is done, we're going to go bring my stuff. And her stuff was things her family had made and given to her, that she never did use them. She used to air them out twice a year and fold them up and put them back in those trunks. And well, someday I'm going to get a new house and I'm going to use these, she'd say. And I guess everybody's kind of like that. You always save things for some other day. Well, anyway, when she went to get this stuff, it wasn't there, and there was nothing there. The house was empty. And I never could figure out all my life why we never went back, or why she couldn't have her stuff, or why we couldn't live there. Because it was nice out there. I liked it. So I'd wake up every morning when I was little, and I wonder, when is that bear going to get up on top of Bear Butte? Because I thought it was a bear. And then, but anyway, she, when I'd go to school at Rapid, well, then she'd stay there at Sturgis, and then when I came home from school, then that's where I went and stayed, was with her. And then until we moved out here. And when we moved out here, boy, I ran away every single day. This lady Dorothy was telling about used to be our diner matron in Rapid City, and her husband, every night they'd come after me. I'd just get past Indian camp down at the agency up on top of the hill, and they'd pick me up. And she kept saying, Ione, if you keep doing this, they're going to expel you. And I really wanted to get expelled. I wanted to go home. And that's when I first met Martin Hyber. I earned some money down there, and I was saving it, and I had $30. And I was going to have Martin Hyber take me back. They just gotten a new truck they call their Rio truck. And he was going to take me back. I said, how much money do I need for gas? And he said, oh, about $30. So boy, I really worked to earn that $30. But there was no box on this truck. It was just had a flat rack on it. And when I went home for vacation, I gave him my suitcase, and he tied it on the back end of that truck. And my mother went out and saw that suitcase, and she knew it was mine. So they went and got the suitcase. That's when they found out I'd been trying to run away all that time, you know. So then that was the end of my trip. Oh, never got to go. But I really didn't like it at the agency. And it seemed like to me I was a million miles away from everything. That's the way I felt. But I guess it wasn't really the way it was.
Could you share a little bit more about, it was very difficult, and sometimes people don't feel like they should share about that, but it'd be good if you could tell Tell some of the difficult parts and then some of the good parts
Of which?
about being at the agency school.
Well, the good parts were you got to go to school. You went part of the time anyway. You worked part of the time. Went to school part of the time. You learned how to work. I guess that was the main thing with me. And you worked, and in our class there was 26 girls and 6 boys, and these girls are mostly from this reservation, and they just raised Cain with the teachers. And we had a bunch of men that were teachers, and they used to just ask them all kind of questions in class, and just embarrass them. They couldn't even answer them and stuff like that. But we went all the way through school like that, and we'd go to school half a day and work half a day, or else we'd go to school a month and work a month. And you worked everywhere, at the dining hall, the laundry, out to milk cows, whatever they wanted you to do, whatever they detailed you to do, that's what you did. But it was sort of different for them when we went to work, when we were in Rapid City, though, in one sense, was that this school was under the Bureau down here, Bureau of Indian Affairs, or in the Interior Department. When we were in Rapid City, they were under the War Department. And so we didn't have to march, like wear uniforms or anything at Cheyenne Agency. So it was better there. The only thing that was really hard for me, I guess, was not knowing how to talk Lakota, and that has been hard for me all my life, though, that part. But there were good times, too. We had dances and we had games. And I was in a band. I was in a chorus. We had a lot of things to do. But it was just that, I don't know, just the area or what. When I graduated in 1940, finally,
like Ione said, when we went to school at Cheyenne Agency, we had to work half a day and go to school half a day, and that was supposed to pay for our room and our board. And they always say that you got everything, the Indians got everything for nothing, and that's where they're really wrong. And I remember I picked the laundry because it was the cleanest place that I thought to work. And I worked in the laundry most of the time, and I was real good friends with the people that run it. They were from Oklahoma. And I remember that we used to, I worked closely with the girl, an older girl by the name of Marie Crowfeather, and she was from LaPlante too. And we ironed shirts, boys' shirts, and we'd had these great big baskets, and they held about 80 shirts wet or damp, and we'd iron those. And of course visit and everything, and I like to iron, so that didn't bother me. So that's why we used to work there. And we worked hard. And one of the things that we had to learn, we're supposed to learn how to do, and I do have an old annual with some pictures in it. The first annual that the Cheyenne River School had was in 1938. And I have that original annual. And in there's a picture of me with some other girls in our barn clothes, our white coveralls. We were supposed to learn how to milk cows. And I never could get milk out of a cow until after I got married and we had milk cows, and then I had to kind of learn how. But my uncle was, he worked at the dairy farm, and so then he would always finish, milk my cow for me, and I'd go and I'd say, I'm going to go and check out the ice cream in the freezer. They had a freezer room where they made ice cream and everything down there, and they furnished all the milk and the cream and everything for the school. And or else he'd tell me, go check out things in there and see how it was, and then we'd accidentally get locked in there and we'd really eat ice cream. I always remember that. And it was kind of fun there. But that working for the time that we worked to pay for our room and board and everything, you know, we would probably have been better off if we went to school all day, because it was better after we did finally get to go to school. And then when it was in 1938, when it was made an accredited school in South Dakota, and then we had to go to school all day. We couldn't work for our room and board, which we wasn't supposed to be doing anyhow. But that was one of the things that I remember about Cheyenne Agency. And there were a lot of good things at Cheyenne Agency too. There was a lot of fun times, and if you obeyed the rules and everything, why then it was a pretty good place to be. Otherwise, why then it was not so good. So then when I graduated and got married after that, well, then the biggest thing in my life then was my family. And I didn't get to go on to school at Haskell because I didn't have the money, and my dad didn't have the money. It took money then, and he didn't have the money, and that was when I got married. And I really wanted to go to school, but I didn't get to go. And here after I had gotten married and everything, why then my government loan came through so that I could have went to school, but I was already married, and of course my husband didn't want me to go, and I didn't get to go. But I did raise my family. I had my first baby. I had my first baby in the first year I was married. I was married 10 months, and I had Carol, and from then on, then I had Ray a year later, and then I had Joanne 3 years later, and I had Dale in 1948. Joanne was born in 45. Well, and then I had a little girl that died in 1947, and then in 1951, and then I had my youngest son, Rodney. And I concentrated on raising my family because that was all I knew. I didn't know anything else except to raise my family and take care of them and everything. And I did that. I never got to go to school or anything until I was after I went to work for the government, the Indian Health Service full-time. I did work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs when I first started working for the government. After we moved up to Eagle Butte, I went to work for them full-time as an instructional aide at the dormitories. And then in 1960, I think it was 8, somewhere there, why then I resigned from my position with the BIA, and I went home and stayed out at the ranch because we had moved to a ranch. My mom died in 1962, and when she died, well, after that, well, then my husband got sick, and he worked at the roads department, and he got sick, and then he had to quit working there. And then we went out in the country and built a place out there and went into the cattle business, and that's where we lived. And in 1968, when I went home, I was going to stay home, but it was really boring because I wasn't working. So then there was a job I stayed home for 4 years, and in 1972, they started the Mental Health and Social Services program at the hospital with Indian Health Service. So I put in for a job as a psychology tech, and I got it. And then after that, well, then I started thinking, after I got into that job, well, then I knew I wasn't so smart. And so then I decided that I better go to school. Excuse me. One of the things that we did was we wanted to have these community colleges on a reservation, and there was no community colleges, there was no nothing here, and so we took classes through Black Hills State College, and I remember Mark St. Pierre was one of my instructors, and he helped me a lot. And Betty Claymore, my supervisor, was one of the instructors. I learned a lot from her through transactional analysis. I learned about myself and what was wrong with me and what I could do and things, and I really got interested in going to school. So then I did some classes through Sinte Glushka down at Rosebud. And I was the first person that graduated from Sinte Glushka after they had their community college. I got my AA degree there, and another girl that worked with me, that was the second one, was Joyce Johnson. She was one of my co-workers. And we went to school together and everything, and we had to do all of our studying through independent studying and what classes that we could get into on the reservation, because we were going to prove that we needed a college on the Cheyenne River Reservation, and that you could do it, because when somebody would want to go to school, their husbands would just throw a royal fit and wouldn't let them go. They didn't want them to leave, and even my husband too. And I said, well, we could do it here if we really want to work. So then we got most of our education by independent study. Then after I graduated, I graduated with my AA degree through Black Hills, and they had the graduation exercises down at Digman Hall in Rosebud, South Dakota, at Rosebud. And so while I was there, I knew when I was doing my AA degree learning, why then I met the medicine men, because we were trying to get the medicine men to work with the doctors, and the doctors wanted to learn. And one of the places that we went to do this was Fort Logan in Denver, Colorado, to their mental health institution there. And this is where I really got acquainted with the medicine men. There was a medicine man by the name of Bill Schwagman. There was Lame Deer, John Fire. There was Chips. I can't remember the rest of them, but there was about 5 medicine men that flew with us. And then when I graduated down to Rosebud at Sinte Glushka, Lame Deer came because they were going to have it over the TV from Sioux Falls. And so I went, and I did know how to rabbit dance and kind of Indian dance, because I'd learned that at LaPont down at the community center. It was a round log building, and that's where we used to go and have our little powwows and stuff, and used to have a lot of fun there. And so then I was the only one that had ever done that. And so then they asked me if I would lead the people that were going to graduate into the hall, and I had 30 minutes to teach them how to dance. I always remember that because it was really funny. Anyhow, I did that, and we were on TV, and then they were going through their ceremonies and everything, and then Lame Deer, he did a hunka ceremony and adopted me as his daughter. And of course he honored me, gave me a eagle plume, and it was a big deal. But I was so frustrated, I don't even remember what all we did. And there were so many people there, you know. And anyhow, that was how I became related to him. And it wasn't too many years after that he did die, though. And I still have the write-up that he did, and I know the college has one. And that was all. He played a big part in my life. He taught me a lot of things, and which was really good. And then after that, we decided to go on to school because I think it was there were some people here in Eagle Butte that were going through the University of the Central Michigan University at Mount Pleasant, and but it was like either Head Start or CHRs, or it was another program, but we couldn't get into it because we worked for Indian Health Service and we were not in their program. But then when we found out that they were doing that, well, then we said, well, maybe we can do that, because they just took just a few little classes there, and that was it. But we said maybe we could talk them into letting us go to their college, and so then the Indian Health Service gave us educational leave when we were going to school, and so then we sent papers, letters, and stuff to these people at this college in Mount Pleasant. And I know we did some pretty good begging, because they flew to South Dakota, to Mobridge, South Dakota, and we had to meet with them, and they came to interview Joyce and I. And I remember it took them about 6 hours or more of steady interviewing. And when we got through, then they finally accepted us into their college. And of course we had to do all the independent study, and we had to have our own team here on in South Dakota. And Betty Kramer was one of them. The psychologist, so I can't remember his name right now. They call that getting old. Anyhow, well, oh yeah, his name was Frank Harding, and he was going to school down at Vermilion, and they had just had a medical school there. And he was a psychologist, but he wanted to be a medical doctor. That's how come he was down there. And so then he was one of them, and I just can't remember who the other ones were. But there were about 4 of them. And they were our team that seen that we were doing all this stuff, you know, here. And then when we took tests, well, then we had to go, like down at Vermilion we went, and different places that we went to take tests. And then they would send them into the university. And we finally got through, and it's time to graduate. And we got our bachelor's degrees of science. And we had to go over there and graduate with the rest of them, and there were just 2,500 of us. And so then, and that was the day that, I remember it was May 17th, I think it was 1974 or 75, and I met Eunice Kennedy that time. She got her honorary doctorate there. And I thought that was really something. Anyhow, then we went over there to graduate, and we got our degrees and everything, and came back here and then showed them that they did need a college here, and that they could do it here, you know, that people could go to school and do independent study, but it was really hard because I'd work and I'd go home. My husband would have my grandkids in bed because I raised 5 of my grandchildren besides going to school and stuff. And I must have done a pretty good job because one of them just graduated from medical school. He's a doctor. One of them is a welder. One of them is a meat cutter. And I have a granddaughter in Japan. And so I thought I did fairly good with them. And blanked out. You want to say something?
I'm just about asleep.
I need to quit talking. You talk.
Anytime you want to take a break, let me know.
Okay, let's break.
Yeah, let's break. So.
Some of the other things that Betty Clemmer and I did when we worked together all those years was we started the Wic Program here on Cheyenne River, and it is still going. We started the nutrition program here for Cheyenne River, and it is still going. And we worked long and hard on those programs to get them started, and then we monitored them for a year after we did get them started, so that we would make sure that all the bugs were out before the directors took over, and then we let them go.
Could you tell what each of those programs did for the people?
The WIC program, of course, is the nutrition program for the babies, and it used to be the babies through 3 years old. I haven't kept up with it. I don't know what it is now. And the nutrition program was a food program for the elderly and disabled, and you had to be 60 years old. Either you or your husband had to be 60 years old. Like if your husband was 60 and you were 50 or 55 or whatever, weren't 60 yet, well then you could also get your meals at a reduced rate at the nutrition center. And these programs were started in most of the communities on the reservation by the directors, and at one time or another, I think all the communities have had the nutrition programs. And it has done a lot to have the people, the elderly, have that one good meal a day. And then like for breakfast they could have cereal or something, and then at night they could have soup and a sandwich or something, but they always got that one good meal a day. And that has, I'm sure, improved the health of the people here on the reservation. Plus with the babies, well then they got milk, juices, and things like that they needed, and that has been a good program. It has helped to reduce our mortality rate with the newborns here on the reservation, and has done a lot of good. I think that Betty Clemmer is the person that had I'd say the largest impact on my life outside of